just continue our conversation about Sudan, and I know you know, as was said passionately by one of my colleagues, the gravity of the crisis that's over there. Full stop, it's the greatest humanitarian crisis on the planet Earth. There's ethnic cleansing going on, an active genocide as described by our own government and others. And people are fleeing right now with the recent attacks on Zamzam and more, but I know you're very aware of this. What I want to ask you about
the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Sudan has reached an alarming peak, one that experts, aid organizations, and even government officials have declared the most severe crisis on Earth today. It is not simply a regional conflict or a political standoff. It is a full-scale humanitarian disaster marked by ethnic cleansing, systematic killings, mass displacement, and widespread famine. The term genocide is not being used lightly. It has been validated by global observers and echoed by U.S. government officials. Sudan, a country already marred by decades of instability, civil war, and international neglect, now stands at the edge of collapse. At the core of this crisis is a violent conflict between the Sudanese Armed Forces (SAF) and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces (RSF). What began as a power struggle quickly devolved into an ethnically motivated war, with innocent civilians bearing the brunt of the violence. Reports coming out of regions like Darfur speak of unspeakable atrocities, entire villages razed, families slaughtered, and women and children subjected to brutal acts of violence. Towns like Zamzam have been attacked with such brutality that survivors speak of ghost cities, where once thriving communities no longer exist. To understand the full gravity of this crisis, one must look beyond casualty numbers and statistics. This is a genocide in motion, fueled by political ambition, tribal tensions, and a lack of decisive international intervention. In many ways, Sudan today mirrors the horrors of Rwanda in 1994, the same systematic targeting of ethnic groups, the same mass graves, the same cries for help from civilians that fall on the deaf ears of the global community. According to the United Nations, over 30 million people, nearly two-thirds of Sudan's population, are in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. Over 10 million have been displaced, both internally and across borders into neighboring countries like Chad and South Sudan. Refugee camps are bursting beyond capacity, with little access to clean water, food, or medical care. Children are dying of starvation, pregnant women are giving birth in the dirt, and diseases like cholera are spreading rapidly in unsanitary conditions. The World Food Programme (WFP) has labeled this crisis as one of the worst food emergencies in decades. Adding to the tragedy is the fact that international aid has struggled to reach those who need it most. Insecurity on the ground, targeted attacks on humanitarian workers, and bureaucratic barriers have all slowed down the flow of life, saving supplies. Some regions of Sudan remain completely cut off, with aid convoys unable to pass through due to ongoing violence. Even airdrops, once considered a viable method for emergency relief, have been restricted or blocked by warring factions. Perhaps the most heart-wrenching aspect of this crisis is the deliberate nature of the violence. This is not an accidental byproduct of war, it is a coordinated effort to erase entire ethnic populations. Eyewitnesses have described how armed militias round up civilians, segregate them based on ethnic identity, and execute them in cold blood. Women have reported being taken to rape camps, where they are held as prisoners and subjected to systemic sexual violence meant to terrorize and degrade entire communities. These war crimes, as documented by Human Rights Watch and other investigative bodies, fit the legal and moral definitions of genocide. Yet, despite all of this, global response has been minimal and inconsistent. While some statements of condemnation have been issued by Western governments and limited sanctions placed on a few military leaders, there has been no coordinated or forceful international strategy to halt the violence. Unlike the wars in Ukraine or Gaza, Sudan's tragedy has failed to generate the same level of media coverage, political urgency, or diplomatic mobilization. This global indifference only empowers those committing atrocities, giving them the confidence to continue unchecked. From the perspective of the United States, This crisis represents both a moral failure and a strategic risk. As Senator Cory Booker passionately stated during a recent Senate hearing, the suffering in Sudan is not some distant or abstract problem. It is the greatest humanitarian crisis on the planet, and the U.S. has the tools and influence to help stop it. Booker underscored that acknowledging the genocide is not enough. Action must follow words, and that includes pressuring allies who are complicit, increasing humanitarian aid, and appointing a dedicated envoy to address the crisis directly. But why is Sudan so often overlooked? Part of the reason lies in geopolitical fatigue. Sudan has been a hotbed of conflict for decades, and the international community has grown weary of its seemingly endless instability. There's also the uncomfortable truth that many conflicts in African nations receive far less attention and support than similar crises in Europe or the Middle East. This discrepancy reveals a painful double standard in global humanitarian priorities, one that must be challenged and corrected. Another reason is the complexity of the conflict itself. With multiple actors, shifting alliances, and foreign nations playing proxy roles, it becomes difficult for outside observers to fully understand what's happening, let alone who to hold accountable. But complexity cannot be an excuse for inaction. As history has taught us time and again, from Bosnia to Syria to Myanmar, genocide thrives in the fog of indifference. In the face of such overwhelming suffering, what can be done? The answer begins with recognition and leadership. The international community, led by influential nations like the U.S., must recognize the scale of this crisis and treat it with the urgency it demands. That includes publicly naming the genocide, pushing for ceasefires, opening humanitarian corridors, and holding perpetrators accountable through international law. It also means increasing funding for relief organizations and ensuring aid actually reaches the victims, even if it means using unconventional delivery methods in war zones. This is not just a Sudanese issue. It is a test of our collective humanity, and how we respond or fail to respond will define our moral credibility in the eyes of the world. In conclusion, Sudan is not simply experiencing a civil conflict, it is enduring a calculated, brutal genocide that is rapidly becoming the most horrifying humanitarian emergency of our time. Innocent lives are being extinguished while the world watches. But it doesn't have to be this way. With political will, coordinated diplomacy, and compassionate leadership, we can save lives. The question is, will we act in time?
I wasn't satisfied when people would answer this way when I was sitting on that side, but now on this side with diplomacy, you always want to be careful what you say publicly, because then people don't want to talk to you if they think it's going to happen in the future. Let me say this, we have expressed, not just to the UAE, but to other countries, that they are turning it into a proxy war, that it's destabilizing the region, that in fact it's creating an environment, not just in Sudan, but it's threatening to South Sudan already faces pretty substantial challenges, but some of that threatens to spill over and make it even worse.
If I can interrupt, Marco, because I think your answer is justifiable. The UAE is a vital ally to the United States in a lot of other critical areas of the world.
But it doesn't serve their interest. But my point is, it doesn't serve the interest of some of these countries involved to continue to pursue this route, because instability there is going to create a breeding nest for...
And I guess when my hope is...
One of the most alarming revelations in the ongoing Sudanese crisis is the involvement of nations that the United States considers key allies, particularly the United Arab Emirates UAE, in fueling violence, instability, and genocide in the region. While Sudan's internal conflict is tragic enough on its own, it becomes even more complex and dangerous when external powers support violent factions for their own strategic gain. In a deeply unsettling exchange during a U.S. Senate hearing, Senator Cory Booker addressed this issue with urgency. He didn't hesitate to name the UAE directly, stating that while it remains an important U.S. partner in the Middle East, it is currently supporting an entity that is carrying out genocide in Sudan. This is a rare and powerful public rebuke, especially from a sitting U.S. senator, and it speaks to the growing frustration among lawmakers about the double standards in American foreign policy. To fully grasp the implications of this accusation, we must understand how foreign involvement has deepened the crisis in Sudan. The main actors in the Sudanese civil war, the Sudanese Armed Forces (SAF) and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces (RSF), are locked in a brutal struggle for control over the country. The RSF, in particular, has been accused of committing some of the worst atrocities, including targeted ethnic cleansing in Darfur, the mass rape of women, and the systematic destruction of entire communities. Multiple credible reports, including from the UN, human rights organizations, and intelligence agencies, suggest that the RSF is receiving logistical support, arms shipments, and possibly financial backing from outside countries, most notably the UE. This includes the provision of military-grade weapons, drone technology, and possibly training assistance. Such support dramatically strengthens the RSF position, allowing them to sustain their military campaign and perpetuate violence against civilians with deadly efficiency. Why would a U.S. ally like the UAE get involved in such a brutal conflict? The answer lies in regional geopolitics and proxy warfare. The Middle East and North Africa have long been battlegrounds for influence, control, and resource competition. Countries like the UAE view Sudan as strategically important, a nation rich in gold, positioned along the Red Sea, and critical to access routes in East Africa. By backing one side in the conflict, the UAE likely hopes to secure political leverage, trade advantages, and future influence in a post-war Sudan, but these geopolitical ambitions come at a devastating cost to human life. By supporting a faction like the RSF, the UAE is not just engaging in cold diplomacy, it is enabling war crimes, prolonging genocide, and undermining international humanitarian law. The weapons and funds provided by outside powers allow the RSF to carry out operations that systematically target civilians. Without such support, the RSF ability to maintain control and execute mass violence would likely be far more limited. Senator Booker's insistence that the United States draw a clear line with allies like the UAE is not only morally justified, it is strategically essential. If Washington continues to turn a blind eye to the complicity of its allies, it loses both credibility and leverage on the world stage. Condemning genocide while working hand in hand with those who enable it sends a message of hypocrisy, especially to countries in Africa that already feel marginalized and abandoned by Western powers. During the Senate hearing, when Secretary of State Antony Blinken was asked whether he had addressed the UAE involvement directly, he provided a cautious and diplomatic response. Blinken emphasized that such matters are often discussed privately to maintain the integrity of ongoing negotiations and partnerships. He stated that the U.S. has made it clear to the UAE and others that turning Sudan into a proxy war is deeply destabilizing, not only for Sudan, but for the broader region, including South Sudan and the Sahel. However, such cautious diplomacy has its limits. While strategic ambiguity can sometimes protect delicate negotiations, it can also enable further destruction if not backed by firm public accountability. The U.S. must decide what its red lines are and whether backing allies who fund genocidal militias crosses those lines. There is historical precedent for this. In past conflicts, American administrations have used sanctions, arms restrictions, and public diplomatic pressure to influence the behavior of allies engaged in harmful actions. In this case, the U.S. could restrict weapons sales, impose targeted sanctions on those directly involved in the Sudan conflict, or publicly call for a cessation of external arms shipments into Sudan. Doing so would not mean severing ties with the UAE or other allies. Instead, it would demonstrate that partnerships must be rooted in shared values, including the protection of innocent lives and adherence to international law. A strong U.S. position on this issue would not only help de-escalate the Sudanese crisis, but also reassert America's moral leadership on the global stage. Moreover, This crisis presents an opportunity to rethink how the U.S. handles ally accountability. Too often, strategic partnerships are treated as untouchable, insulated from criticism due to military contracts, economic interests, or regional cooperation. But when such partnerships directly contribute to atrocities, silence is complicity. The U.S. cannot claim to champion human rights while ignoring the role its allies play in violating them. At the grassroots level, the Sudanese diaspora and human rights advocates around the world are demanding that Western governments do more, not just with aid, but with diplomatic courage. They want the U.S. to stop hiding behind careful language and to name and shame those responsible. They want countries like the UAE held accountable, not just with quiet phone calls, but with firm international consequences. Senator Booker's remarks also reflect a deeper anxiety about America's global image. As African nations witness the U.S. hesitating to confront its own allies over genocide, they increasingly turn to China, Russia, and other powers who offer support without lectures. This shift threatens America's long-term influence and undermines efforts to build democratic institutions, economic development, and regional stability in Africa. In conclusion, the accusation that the UAE, a major U.S. ally, is supporting genocidal forces in Sudan is a moral flashpoint. It forces the United States to choose between convenient diplomacy and principled leadership. If America truly believes in the sanctity of human life, in international law, and in defending the innocent, then it must take a stronger stance. That means pressing the UAE and other involved nations to end their support for armed militias, investigating the flow of weapons into conflict zones, and making it clear that supporting genocide directly or indirectly will not be tolerated. This moment calls for more than diplomacy. It calls for moral clarity.
Shortfall right now in advancing American interests on the continent.
If I might just real quick, we haven't closed any embassies, so I think people are responding to like articles talking about the potential for embassy closures and things of that nature, but we haven't closed any embassies, and we have been engaged. Listen, Africa to me is one of the priorities that I've set for us in terms of our global view, because of the opportunities, because of the youth of the continent, because of explosive growth that we're going to foresee. And as an example of it, one of the things we prioritized, which a lot of people thought was intractable, was trying to reach a peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda. Now, it's not done, but we brought them both here to Washington, D.C. about a month ago. They signed a memorandum of understanding. The negotiations are moving forward. They're actually moving forward very well. Our hope is to arrive at a peace deal there that ultimately ends what was turning out to be a very brutal and difficult conflict. So I take your point on Sudan and the need for an envoy. We would love to find the right person to handle that portfolio, because it has to be the right person. And we have played a supportive role. For example, the UK, about a month and a half ago, led a Sudan summit in London for a day, where a lot of other countries, when we sent someone, we've offered to be helpful and work with them on it. But a lot of other countries either didn't make commitments or didn't live up to the commitments. The summit sort of was a minor disappointment, because while everyone talks a big game around the world about it, they're not stepping up. But I take your point. I'll get you your answer on the flights, because I'm not aware of that specific waiver. And on the envoy, we'd love to work with you to find the right person.
And the ambassadors and other things.